I trained for 1 week to become a movement god in Apex Legends. In this video, you're going to see my 1 week progression in training. I also found a lot of really cool tools to help me with my practice, so stay tuned till the end to check out those. Alright, now let's get straight into the video with day 1. For the first day, I was really excited to get into R5. I joined one of the first practice servers I found and started my grind. The first task I wanted to achieve was tap strafes and wall bounces. I was already pretty good at them, so it wasn't very hard. After that, I went ahead and moved on to super glides. Reality set in pretty quickly though. Although I understood the idea of a super glide, there was something wrong with my timing. And even though I had watched a bunch of tutorials going into this challenge, it took me 30 minutes before I was able to hit my first super glide. I wasn't able to make any progress on the next exercise either because I was lacking consistency. I only made it to the first platform a couple of times before I decided it was time to move on. My final task for the day was going to be mantle jumps. So I loaded up the main client and went into the training range. I made it up to the helipad a few times, and after about 15 minutes, I decided it was time to play some games. The games were more difficult than usual. I caught myself thinking way too much about what movement I wanted to use or try to use, and it ended up hindering me more often than it was helpful. Regardless, it is a tough learning curve, so I called it a pretty successful wrap on day 1 and decided to get off for the night. Since I already had tap strafes and wall bounces down, I went straight to super glides in R5. I felt like I was making progress. However, when I watched it back, it was easy to tell that the timing was still random and that I had no consistency. I was getting annoyed. I was doing the same thing every time at the same time, but it was just random. Sometimes I got a glide, sometimes I dropped off the map. I needed a break. I went ahead and started practicing my mantle jumps. I found a cool map that helped a lot, and took what I learned to the streamer house to get some practice. Even though I felt pretty warmed up, my games on day 2 went poorly. I was overthinking every move I made and started getting frustrated with myself. I knew a cool head would be needed to complete this challenge, so I got off the game and took a genuine break. I listened to music, chilled out, just so that I could come back refocused for day 3. I crawled out of bed on day 3, and I started debating whether or not I wanted to continue this challenge. I was still super frustrated about the previous day, but I decided to go ahead and start with some of the mechanics I was already getting decent at. I did some mantle jumps and zip jumps in the streamer house, and I even put together some clean movement with some tap strafes and wall bounces just to get warmed up. Then, I moved on to the parkour map. I had a great start, and somehow, in a way I was not able to later replicate, I managed to skip the fatigue wall bounce. But my hype and confusion lasted for about 2 seconds before I realized I needed a super glide into a wall climb to continue this. So, I decided to go right back into the trenches, and I went straight to the super glide exercise. Yet again, I was running into my previous issue. Although I had somewhat better timing, and I even made it to the second platform, I could still go 10 or more tries without hitting one super glide. At this point, I was getting frustrated. I was about halfway into the challenge already, and my glides were just the same as day 1. I had put in so much effort, and I had nothing to show for it. I considered whether or not I could do it, whether I could even finish this video if I wasn't able to make any headway. This is when I decided I needed to really lock in. I closed Discord, I opened up a YouTube video, and I practiced my super glide for 2 hours straight. But I had no consistency or progress to show for it. My hand hurt, I was annoyed, and I wanted to give up. That's when, out of the corner of my eye, in the YouTube video I was watching, I saw a tab. It was called Super Glide Trainer. I immediately looked it up. I was starting my inputs at the same time, but I needed a frame-perfect jump and crouch, and I quickly realized that's where my issue was. Even if my crouch was 1 frame too late or 1 frame too early, I had a 0% chance of hitting a super glide. This was it, the key I needed to open the door to movement heaven, but I just couldn't pull it off. I couldn't open the door no matter how hard I tried. I decided to save the tab, and I logged off for day 3, and I went to bed, hopeful and ready to give it my all on day 4. I was a bit more confident going into day 4. I was excited to try out my new practice tool. I opened up the Super Glide trainer and started practicing my timing. I knew I needed to form muscle memory if I wanted to be consistent. I experimented with different key input combinations to see if anything made it easier. After a few different inputs, I remembered there was a Xzylas video where he uses V as crouch and spacebar as jump. That way he could hit both buttons with the same finger and he had really good timing and was really consistent. I tried it and I instantly saw my margins dissipate. I was getting better. I wasn't in the green, but I was getting there. So I launched up R5 to compare it to the previous day. And I got the first exercise in one try, and I even made the glide back with ease. This was it, the breakthrough I needed to see more progress. I still wasn't that consistent, less than 50%, but it was night and day compared to day 3. I still knew I needed to maintain my focus though, so I made sure to keep switching it up. I did mantle jumps, tap strafes, wall bounces, fatigue wall bounces, and I always kept coming back to the super glides in between. I was ready and excited going into day 5. On day 5, I was refreshed and remotivated. I had hope. I opted to keep the same regiment. I started with Super Glide Trainer, did Super Glides, practiced movement in the streamer house, and hit movement combos. Every time, I did Super Glides in between different exercises. I could feel the progress. It was evident. I was hitting a lot of back-to-back glides and even 3 in a row. I would still whiff a lot, but I was forming consistency and muscle memory, and I didn't have dead areas where I failed a bunch of attempts all in a row. Then, it finally happened. I cleared all 4 of the platforms on the 4-platform exercise. My mantles were also greatly improving. I was starting to make it on top of the streamer house consistently, and my movement strings felt clean. I was schmovin'. I went ahead and played some games on day 5, and I was intentionally able to hit some glides and a lot of really clean wall bounces. I still had whiffs, but my decision making was improving, and the movement felt more natural after the previous 4 days of awkward failure. I was in eager anticipation of what I would achieve at the end of this challenge, and thus ended a successful day 5. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I again started on day 6 with the Super Glide Trainer, and followed the same sequence I'd been practicing in. I hit 3 back-to-back Super Glides right off the start, and then cleared the platform exercise again, and I made it across in only 3 attempts. I was heating up. I was progressing faster than I could have hoped for after being at such a low point on day 3. In this closing half of the challenge, I had massively grown in my tech. I finally had the muscle memory I needed, and even though I wasn't at a perfect ratio, I didn't really care. I was popping off. I finished the rest of my practice and hopped into the main client to run some games. The difference was clear. I wasn't so distracted anymore. I didn't have to focus on my movement. I just needed to stay calm and play the game like I usually did, and just sprinkle in some new movement. I couldn't believe it was almost over. 6 of the 7 days had passed, but I couldn't help finding myself even more excited and driven to finish this challenge. I felt like the days had disappeared. I was on day 7, the final day of the challenge that I had set out for myself a week prior. I decided to maintain the same regimen of practice. I started with the Super Glide Trainer, moved to Super Glides, and then did the movement map, tap strafes, wall bounces, and mantle jumps, along with other movement strings in the streamer house, in between all the Super Glides I did. And just like that, the challenge was over. The time had passed, and here I was. I still wasn't able to hit everything with perfect consistency. I don't think a human actually could. 100% accuracy on a frame-perfect mechanic is tough at 240 FPS. Even when I started the challenge, I knew there were people with macros, special keyboards, or configs to change their FPS on certain inputs. All of that just to make a Super Glide easier to hit. But for me, this challenge was just a way of testing my ability, to push the limits and improve my gameplay. I feel like I succeeded, at least in what I set out to do. I was still far from a movement god, but I was leagues beyond where I began in this challenge. I had set a goal and I worked towards it. With that being said, I patted myself on the back and I called this 1 week movement god training an overall success. Thank you so much for watching this far into the video. If you can leave a like, I'd really appreciate it, and it helps me out a lot with the YouTube algorithm. And of course, I will love you forever if you do. But with that out of the way, I wanted to give some closing thoughts. I feel like I need to say that movement isn't the be-all end-all of Apex Legends, and during this challenge I learned that it's fun and it gives you potential options when taking a fight, evading a fight, and it just makes moving around the map more interesting to someone with a rat brain like me. However, it's good to remember that with correct positioning and aim, you can always create an advantage without the need of anything flashy or difficult. I always thought movement was 50% of the game, and I still do think that to some degree, but it can easily be compensated for by knowing when to take the right fight, being in the right position, or just using a controller. I had to say it. Oh, and last thing, I put the Discord to R5 Reloaded down in the description so that you can go ahead and go download it for yourself and hop on the custom servers. I also put the Super Glide Trainer link down there and anything else I thought would be helpful. Thank you so much. Sato out.